All right, hi there, everyone, and welcome to what is our last class of the group SAT training today. So, general game plan for today. We're going to be going back to that historical article we looked at the end of last class. Last time we just kind of worked over it as far as how to decipher what it was about, getting that big picture, what was the main topic, the main argument. And then today we'll actually get into the supporting questions. So we'll jump right into those. After that, we'll be looking at a comparative article. Um, so for that one, we'll see how our timing goes. My plan for it is to kind of jump around, not go through all 11 questions on it, but at least work through how to obtain the big picture, how to work on the compare contrast side of things, because that's the only difference. Otherwise, all the other questions are going to be the same. So we're just going to focus on the compare contrast nature of that article. After that, we're going to circle back to some of the earlier topics. So we will go through one full writing passage, give all of you some time to work and a chance to see how that time works, that 9-minute pace per passage. And then hopefully then at the end, then we'll also get to some math problems. Depending on how much time we have, we'll determine how many we do on that side of things right there. So that's our general plan for things. Same thing as well. We'll kind of have some general questions, sprinkled in, at the beginning and at the end. I already see some that popped up in the chat. Additionally, as we go topic by topic, so reading, writing, math today, definitely feel free to bring up any questions related to that section specifically. And so, like, if you put some questions in the chat right now, and they're section specific, I'll try to save them for that moment, either the reading, writing, or math accordingly. But that can be equally as important as well. Not just overall test strategy, but if there's little things that we need to clarify, if it's been a while, we can definitely have some time for that. Right. Yeah, so good question right here, because I know we've talked a lot about the possibility of testing multiple times and like the idea of a super score and all that. So at the same time, it's perfectly fine to only test once and get a really good score at first and be done with it. There's no requirement to test more than once. Ideally, if you put in the work at the beginning and you work really hard before you take your first test, ideally you don't have to take it again. That is the goal right there. So the only time that you might consider that, if you do have a very high score, it's well above the mark that you need for the schools you're looking at. You might consider if there was a dramatic difference between your math versus your verbal and just focus on the one section that was lower. But if you did well in both sections, you're very satisfied with your score the first time, that's awesome. That's honestly what we want. We don't want to have to take it multiple times. You just have that ability to, if you're not satisfied with the first attempt. And yes, for those of you who are taking the PSAT this fall, since you're enrolled in this class, you're either a 10th grader, 11th grader, or senior. So for those 10th and 11th graders, content-wise, exactly the same test. It's just slightly shorter right there. So another good question as far as like big strategy. So when is the best time to take it? With that in mind, this is going to vary based on everyone's individual schedules. You want to make sure you're testing at a time when your stress is relatively low. So for that reason, it's not always a good time to test around your finals period. It definitely can be done, but sometimes that leads to a little bit more stress. So usually like the May and June tests for that reason are sometimes a little bit iffy as far as if they're a good testing opportunity or not. Reason why is that if you're enrolled in any AP classes, they give the SAT right at the beginning of May. Well, that's also right around the time when AP tests are coming along. So generally, it's tough to double up on those because both tests require your full attention. So I might be cautious of that time. For June, depending on when you get out of school, you may either be right around finals week, that first week of June, or you may already be out of school. If you're out of school, go ahead, take it. If you're in the middle of finals week, also kind of could be hit or miss right there. Same goes for if you have any like midterms or trimester tests. If you're during a finals period, probably not as good of a time to take it. Or just, if there's other things that are going on in your life, if there's, stressful things, times where you're really busy, probably avoid those months. But otherwise, there's not necessarily any direct advantage to one month or the other. That's where the scaling factor comes into place, is that all tests are going to be graded equally. They accommodate for any slight differences in the test. So work it around your schedule, find the time that you're going to be the least busy, the least stressed, so that you can have some good prep going into it and ultimately be in as good of a rested and confident mindset going into test day as well. So great question there. Right. Any other just kind of general things as we get going? For what it's worth, just to expand on that answer a little bit, and we may go ahead and get started. If you're prepping through the summer, so now I know it's a little bit late to register for this August test, but if you're currently a sophomore, for instance, thinking ahead to next year, the August one is a great time to take it, just because you have all summer to prep. You're not having to worry about splitting your time between a full school schedule. So that can be a very good time. Also, if you're taking PSAT in October can also be a good time just to bundle your PSAT and your regular SAT. So you're taking them within a couple weeks of each other, and all the effort for one pays off in the other test. So you get a double reward for the effort of one. Then yes, the recordings, they are going to be up on the YouTube channel after this. And then as far as like individual scores, right? So for everyone's journey is going to be different, right? Depending on where your current situation is. So, I wouldn't necessarily say any score is easy or hard. It's all just kind of about where you're currently at, the amount of work you're willing to put in. Obviously, the closer you are to a score currently, the easier it's going to be to get there. But that's, everyone's journey is different as far as what that score is going to look like. And that's and a good question as well. So for the PSAT, if you're taking the PSAT 10 already, I would highly recommend you take the PSAT 11. Reason being that only 11th graders are eligible for the national merit. So even if you got a score that would have gotten you into national merit qualification as a sophomore, they won't count that towards your national merit eligibility. You have to be a junior in order to get that. So, so definitely would recommend taking it in that 11th grade year just for that reason right there. Then I'll clarify that I don't believe there's any time limit or anything as far as like when you can go back and watch the videos. But we can get clarification on that. And no, so, and not 12th graders either. So for the national merit, that's only an 11th grade test right there, only 11th grade eligibility. As far as signing up for the PSAT or SAT, it is possible where your school may be offering it. There are school day offerings of the SAT, and typically PSAT is on school day as well. If you're not going for that one opportunity, or if you're retesting or your school doesn't offer it, every sign up opportunity will be coming through the College Board. So you have to go to the College Board website, create an account, and then be able to register and make payment on their website accordingly. So let's go ahead and get started. Make sure there's time at the end to circle back to general questions. And also, like I said, if you have things that we need to clarify as we go section by section, definitely bring those up as we go along. All right, so going back into the reading right there. And this one, just because I saw a couple of questions pop up. If it's an individual question, like if it's your exact personal situation, I'm not going to answer those just because we've got 250 people. If we spent, everyone's breaking down everyone's individual situation, wouldn't be appropriate for 250 people. So for that situation, we can talk later about that. I do individual tutoring on the side as well. So if you want to go deep dive in your individual situation, consultation, private tutoring, things like that, I will put my info at the end for that. So we'll keep the questions more just general for the whole class today. All right. So diving into this article, we talked through it yesterday as far as Virginia Woolf. She was talking about the current situation for women in English society, 1938. And she recognized that there was inequality. She wasn't a fan of that inequality. She wanted that to change. She said that they could change. There was an opportunity to make that change a reality. And so a lot of this article was getting into that, as far as like how to actually apply that plan, create an action, and then go forth and succeed so that there was equality in society later on. And so as we get into these first two questions, 32, 38, so these are common types of, big picture questions. We've seen plenty of these earlier on, but we have either the central claim of the passage or main purpose of the passage. Oh, and yes, and it's the same link that we've been working with. If you need the link, I'll go ahead and put that in the chat for everyone. But same link that we've been working with every time. So main purpose of the passage, central claim of the passage. So the only thing that's a little bit trickier here, and it's definitely worthwhile to go over these two questions, is that for the most part, our big picture ones have been straightforward. Even if some of the wrong ones had a kernel of truth in them, we were able to fairly easily find what the flaw was and point them out. But with these two, there's two that are true, that they are completely true. And for 32, we could eliminate A because she's not emphasizing the value of a tradition. She's going the opposite of that. She wants to change what the tradition is. Stressing the urgency of an issue, that could be true for us. Also highlighting the severity of social divisions, that could be true. Our last one, question the feasibility of an undertaking. So feasibility is, can it be done? She's not questioning that. She's just saying, what is the plan to make this a reality? So D would also be up. However, both B and C are true, completely true answers right there. And this is one where we have to look at dominant features. So when we're talking on a big picture side of things, then we're going to be trying to see, well, what was primarily the point? Like, even if we went back to like the very first one, like the story, for instance, they talked about the tradition, the culture, but it was only the introduction. Everything else was about the characters' interactions, for instance. Now, same thing here. If we look at the beginning part, the first part of the article, roughly the first 20 lines or so, that is about the problem. So that's the current situation. What are they observing? Everything else, as we go into the rest of it right here, from 20, 45, all the way down to the rest of it right here, now is about finding a solution to that problem. So how will they obtain the solution? What's the plan moving forward? What does the future look like? So as a result, the better answer is going to be B, stress the urgency of an issue. Yes, there is a problem. There is social division. We're not going to just complain about that and do nothing. Instead, we're actively seeking, this is an issue. Let's make it urgent. Let's make that change a reality. And so in a way, it's almost kind of like a mathematical problem right there. A greater percentage of it is focused on the solution rather than the problem. And so that can affect a big picture answer. Similar, very similar. Oh yeah, and so good question right there. So when we talk big picture, being general is not necessarily a bad thing. Many times, in order to fully sum up an article in just one line, in just half a sentence, we will need to be fairly general. Even like thinking of like going back to the very first article we did of talking about the story, of how is a detailed description or a meaningful encounter, detailed description of a meaningful encounter. That realistically could be anything without any context. And so many times, big picture questions will have general answers like that. Obviously, if we can get more specific, that's great. But if it's falsely specific, as we'll see in 33, that's also not a good thing, right? So being specific is good. More details are great, but if they're not beneficial, if they're not supporting the overall big picture, being more specific isn't necessarily better if it's not accurate. And that's exactly what we'll see on 33. So we go through these choices. The first one, A, educated women face a decision about how to engage with existing institutions. This one's kind of tricky right here. The second part is definitely true. Facing a decision about how to engage with existing institutions is what this article is completely about. Sometimes people might get a little caught up on the first part, the educated women, because it says that they're not educated at public schools and universities. However, later on, it does clarify that they have done their thinking, they have done their studying at home, um, and being able to still acquire knowledge. So in that case, they still are educated. They just may not be formally educated. They had to educate themselves. So A does check out on 33. The second one, women can have positions of influence in English society. That part completely checks out right there. But then the second part, there is a flaw, only if they give up some of their traditional roles. She doesn't say that that's the only way to create that equality. And so because of that, B would be out. C, we look at this one, the male monopoly on power in English society has had grave and continuing effects. That is true. That's kind of like how we had on 32, how this is a problem. We're completely acknowledging there is a problem that's happening. So that could be true as well. We wouldn't necessarily have anything in there to eliminate right from the beginning. Our last one, the entry of educated women into positions of power traditionally held by men. So far, everything works, will transform those positions. Now, this part right here, that part's the flaw because she doesn't say the positions will have to change, that there's going to be any accommodations to have new people in them. It'll just simply be that new people have opportunities. Positions are staying the same. Who is in them is changing. So now we get to the point, just like with 32, there were two answers that are true. One's focused on the problem, one's focused on the solution. So for the same reason we had on 32, that only about 20 lines were focused on the problem, about 60 lines were focused on the solution, much more emphasis on the solution. A is going to be our best one. How are they going to reach that solution? What is that decision they're going to make about how to engage with the existing situation? So that one is a tricky couple of questions right there. It is a good thing to be aware of because there still will only be one right answer. The majority of the time, we will be able to completely eliminate all the wrong ones. But occasionally, as we see right here, if it's big picture, they may have multiple true statements. But if one is more dominant than the other, as far as how much it's talked about, that will become the best answer for big picture. So definitely a good thing to be aware of, a good couple of questions to dive in deep right there with. All right, now, and we'll go through the rest of these. This one, a lot of people do find it to be a harder article. So if you feel like the historical ones are more difficult for you, don't be alarmed. That's pretty common, for that to be happening. So don't worry too much there. 34. So Wolf uses the word "we" throughout the passage, mainly to blank. This is somewhat vocab adjacent right here. It's not necessarily looking at just one line, but it is taking the contextual meaning of the word "we." In and of itself, "we" could be anything. It depends on who the speaker is. It depends on who the speaker is associating themselves with. If I said "we," that's probably referring to the class right here. Everyone in the class, myself and everyone else here. In this case, who is "we" referring to? Well, that's Virginia Woolf, and it's who is she talking to? She's talking to the women they're trying to promote that change in society. So understanding who "we" is the first battle right there. If we can determine who that is, that's going to help us out. Now, as we look at our choices right here, I would say this is much more of a big picture one. Overall, what's most important for their mission? Because as you go through them all, A, looking for friendliness. Friendliness is good. That wouldn't be a bad thing for their cause. Candor, so being candid and honest and upfront, that could also be beneficial. C, solidarity, being united behind a cause, that could be good to help them out. D, being respectful. So all of these could be beneficial. Kind of like how we had in 32 through 33, we can't necessarily say any of them are blatantly wrong. But what's most important to the cause? So as she works through the solution, she's talking about them becoming united together, how everyone that she's speaking to has to prioritize the mission, prioritize the cause. And so as a result, C would become our best one, establish a sense of solidarity among a group of people, especially in the right hand column. She's continually pushing for everyone's involvement, not accepting any excuses from everyone, but that they have to prioritize the cause to make that change a reality. So solidarity, being united together, that's going to be the best showcasing of the word based on the relevancy of the passage. So somewhat context clues for what we is. Beyond that becomes more of a big picture summary. What is it about? Now, as we work through the others, we will start to get a little bit more detailed, back to how the majority of articles will be primarily detailed questions. 35. So with 35, this is one of those types of questions where they do not tell you where to look. The majority of the time they tell you where to look. That is one of the College Board's traits, is that most of the time they tell you where, but occasionally they don't. Typically like one or two, if it's not a big picture, that would be the case where they wouldn't tell you where to look. But they do tell you what to look for. You just have to be aware of what is it asking. According to the passage, Wolf chooses the setting of the bridge because it blank. So if we can find that, if we can find where the bridge is being discussed, we are going to find our answer accordingly. So it is brought up a couple places. One of them is on the right-hand side at line 47. We are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions. None of our answers really talk about that too much. You could stretch some answers to fit it, but that isn't our best place. Instead, the first paragraph, the other place where it's mentioned, is really going to give us our answer. So close at hand is a bridge over the River Thames, an admirable vantage ground for us to make a survey. Now, just from that, we could get our answer. It might be kind of jumping the gun a little bit, but if you understand what an admirable vantage ground is, a good place to be able to see everything, you could get your answer just from that. But let's dig deeper to really get that textual evidence. The river flows beneath, barges pass laden with timber, bursting with corn. There on one side are the domes and spires of the city, on the other, Westminster and the Houses of Parliament. Is a place to stand on by the hour dreaming. Now, just from that, if you stop there, you might say fanciful reflection, stand on by the hour dreaming, that those go together. However, she's not finished. She says, but not now. Now we are pressed for time. Now we are here to consider facts. Now we must fix our eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. And there, that is the crux. That is our answer. We have textual evidence. This is why they are on that bridge, to fix their eyes upon the procession of the sons of educated men. That will directly line up with B, provide a good view of the procession of sons of educated men. Always be extremely literal when we're looking at the text. Don't try to delve for a deeper meaning. They'll tell you if they want something figurative. Even then, they'll make it obvious. Try to be as literal as possible at all times. Now, she mentions this procession, and this is one of those more old-timey styles of writing where she's making this complex analogy to a procession. It can be a little bit hard to understand what that is. But at first, probably wouldn't worry about it. Focus on the big picture things. Don't worry about the details that are a little bit hard to understand. But then 36, 37, that focuses on the procession. Wolf indicates the procession she describes in the passage, and then our options. So what is the procession? How is it being described? And then that's followed up on 37 with which choice provides the best evidence. So always use that strategy. Unless you're 100% sure of the very first one right there, we're typically going to work to our evidences first and utilize them to come back and prove our previous answer. So we look to the first one, 12 through 17. This one gives the description of what the procession is. There they go, our brothers who have been educated at public schools and universities, mounting those steps, passing in and out of those doors, sending those pulpits, preaching, teaching, administering justice, practicing medicine, transacting business, making money. So describing what it is, this shows the analogy that it is just going to school, getting jobs, That is the procession she's talking about. Now we go through our answers. Talking about practical influence, well, that could describe jobs, but by saying has come to have practical influence, that doesn't necessarily line up because the implication there is that it did not have practical influence previously. Same thing with B. If it says has become, that indicates it was not before. So may not line up. Rich and powerful. It does have men in England there, but as far as rich and powerful, not all of those are going to be rich men. You know, they mentioned some like teachers and preachers, not necessarily professions with a ton of money in. D has become less exclusionary in its membership in recent years. Nothing about that is said right here because it's just about the men, the brothers who are doing it. So this one doesn't line up. We could cross that out. 17 through 19, right after, it is a solemn sight, always a procession, like a caravan crossing a desert. So that basically the completion of the analogy right there. Nothing really lines up with our choices on 36. They're looking for the more literal interpretation, so that doesn't work either. 23, 24. For their trapezing along at the tail end of the procession, we go ourselves. Now, we as the women, as we discussed in question 34, so this could line up with something. If we look at answer choice D, less exclusion, if women are in the procession, if they're in the jobs and in the universities, that could point to less exclusion for us. So this is definitely a possibility. 30, 34, we see that one. It says we too can leave the house, can mount those steps, pass in and out those doors, make money, and administer justice. We who now agitate these humble pens may another century or two speak from the pulpit. This one is also pointing to that idea of less exclusion if women have that potential to join in the procession. And so we have two strong evidences that are pointing to D on 36. Some of our previous ones, the evidence was more obvious, and then from there we deciphered the first one. This one I would say is kind of flipped. The first one becomes more obvious because we have the two evidences pointing to it. Then we have to decipher between the evidences which one is stronger. It can be a little bit tricky right here because they are both pointing to the same thing. However, 23, 24 is pointing towards actual action. We go ourselves, as opposed to 30, 34, where it focuses on can. They can do this, can do that, but with 23, 24, they actually are doing it. They are going. So because of that, C is going to be a little bit stronger evidence. They both point towards the same direction, but that's another way where they can make the pairs tricky right there, of just picking that truly best one. We'll go ahead to the next page, but just any questions on those first six before we do so. And yes, yeah, it is the last class for our group together. Yeah, and so to reemphasize that, right? So going back to 32 and 33, because I know it can be kind of a difficult explanation because both B and C on 32, or both A and C on 33 are true statements. But this is where we're just treating it like a math problem. If both things come up in an article and it's a big picture question, which item comes up more? Is repeated, is covering the entirety of the article? That's what we'll try to focus on. And so if we look at that from just a percentage standpoint, and I know it's like a mathematical analogy, but it's really what's happening. About 25% of the article, the first 20 lines are about the problem. The remaining 60 or so lines, so 75% of the article is about the solution. And so because of that, a greater emphasis on the solution than the problem. And so for the other ones, just kind of going back to the parts I crossed off, she does not say the only way they can get positions of influence is by giving up their traditional roles. So that word only crossed out says why that is not true. Same thing with D, because she says the positions aren't changing, it's just who's in them will change. That's why that one could be eliminated as well. All right, so yeah, so then, and this is, a good question overall for reading, while we're in the reading section, this can be applied to writing as well. So talking about just expanding our vocabulary, because of how they present the test, because so much of the test is focused on vocabulary in context. I think it's much more valuable to have a natural expansion of vocabulary. So, one, what that means is really drive home practicing context clues. Whenever you come to a word you don't know, whether it's on the test or even outside of the test, try to get context clues, try to read around it to decipher the meaning of that word. That will help naturally expand your vocabulary. The second part of that, of how I mentioned, even outside of our test prep to utilize that skill, ultimately, the more you read, the more your vocabulary will increase, especially if you're reading high academic material, things that are at high school, college level. That will dramatically increase your vocabulary just because of those exposure to new words. There are some shortcuts that are out there. There are like some vocab flashcards that exist. I have had students that have had success with those. The only problem with it is that people tend to utilize them as just a memorizing the dictionary idea, and then they get into the test, and words that carry multiple definitions can still trick them up. So the more you naturally expand your vocabulary, the more you read. Ultimately, I know it's more of a long-term fix for things, but that's the best way to improve on vocabulary overall. Good other general question for reading that we see. So as far as the timing side of things, so 13 minutes is the goal. Ultimately, just with everything, right, the more you practice it, the better off you're going to be. However, I will say that the number one way to speed up your time is going to be on the initial reading of things. So that's why I strongly recommend try not to take more than 4 minutes on your first reading of the article. If your reading pace is not going to allow you to complete the article in 4 minutes, that's okay. Gravitate more towards the skimming techniques of trying not to focus on every word, just to gather general context. The quicker you can move on to the questions, the better. If you're still doing that and still really struggling with the skim technique and still being very, very short on time, no matter what, at that point, then there is that third strategy of just going straight to the questions. That can help you get through a lot of the questions, especially everything where they tell you where to look, starting with those. That can really help speed things up accordingly right there. So try out those different techniques. Ultimately, the more you work, the faster you're going to work just naturally. But some of those things, skimming or even going straight to the questions, are ways to help mediate that, put you in a better position for success. Yes. So with that, like I said, these are general guidelines. It doesn't have to be exact. Obviously, if you spend less than 4 minutes, that's great. If you spend a little bit over, if you're 4 minutes, 30 seconds reading or 5 minutes reading, it's not the end of the world. We just know the more time we spend on that first reading, the less time there is for the actual questions themselves. So around 4 minutes is a good balance. Keeping it to that time or less for the read will allow you plenty of time to get through the other questions. As long as you're focused, as long as you, like with the vocab, go for the context, focus on that one sentence. For the paired questions, if you follow that technique of going to evidence first, that will speed you up a lot. As long as you're doing those types of strategies, there will be enough time to get through it. But yeah, great questions right there. Yeah, and we talked about this yesterday as well. So as far as keeping your pace, because that is very important, there's not a guarantee that there will be a clock in the testing center. Many times, because they are in classrooms or at schools, there's going to be a clock there, but the College Board does not require there to be a clock. Ultimately, keeping your time is up to you. So highly recommend you bring your own watch into the test. As long as it's not a smartwatch, you're allowed to bring your own timepiece in, and I highly recommend you do so. Yeah, good questions there. Let's go ahead and get to the last 4 for this article, and then if there's more general reading questions, we'll address those. So going ahead to the last 4 for this article. So there's another pair with 3839. They tell you where to look once again, as they always will with the pairs. This is another one where there's even like a third part to it. Wolf characterizes the questions in lines 50 through 57 as blank. So you might even start with that of just what are the questions themselves. For we have to ask ourselves here and now, do we wish to join that procession or don't we? On what terms shall we join the procession? Above all, where is it leading us? The procession of educated men. So with that, those are the questions themselves. I would say, overall, it may not be the most helpful thing right there of what we read in the questions, but like we saw on the article yesterday, sometimes starting at that first part, like what was the original claim, will point us in the right direction, will help us out. So not a bad thing to start with, even if this one didn't give us too much. Um, so then as we go to 39, right, the evidence, well, how are we going to describe the questions? Let's see what those options have to say. So 46, 47, that says we are here on the bridge to ask ourselves certain questions. Great, but we don't really have any description of them, right? There's no firm description in those lines. That's something we could cross out. 48, 49, right after, there is a description. They are very important questions, and we have very little time in which to answer them. So, very important, very little time. Does that correspond with one of our answers? It does. So, very important, momentous, very little is pressing. This is an example like we've seen earlier. If you find that perfect pairing like that, this could be one where you just say, I've got my answer. I'm going to move on ahead right there. And this will be it. C as 38, B as 39. But let's show why the others are not correct either. With 57, this one can be tempting because it does say the moment is short. That is dealing with time and being pressing, for instance, but it's just one description, it's not two. So we know for sure that B would be stronger than C right there as far as evidence is concerned. 62, that isn't even talking about the questions when it says that excuse shall not serve you, madam. So unrelated to the questions that can be safely eliminated. Like I said, ideally we want to look at all four for time management purposes. If you have one where you're convinced that's the answer, it's locked in, you're good to go. You don't necessarily have to look at all of them, but in an ideal world, you would want to. So to clarify your question, that's exactly what you're doing. Start evidence first, work backwards. 90% of the time, that's the best way to do it, is start with evidence, work backwards, unless you just already have the answer memorized. Work backwards is the way to go. Right after that is 40. Now, this is back to the vocab and more like a traditional vocab question. What is the context? Now, with this, they do ask in an interesting way. They say, what is the meaning of the figurative sixpence referred to in line 70, 71? Initially, you might look at that and be a little bit thrown off because I've always said, well, always be extremely literal. There's no figurative meaning, there's no opinion. That's okay because of how they present the question right here. Because it's vocab is always a context-based question anyway. So when they're saying, what's the figurative meaning of a word, they're just saying, what does this word mean in context? So realistically, no different than what we've been doing on other vocab questions, even if on the surface it may look a little bit weird to start off. So we read through it. They've thought, well, they stirred the pot while they rocked the cradle. It was thus they won us the right to our brand new blank. Falls to us now to go on thinking, how are we to spend that blank? Think we must. So what's our context? Something has been given to them, and now they have a chance to do something with it, whatever that thing is. For what's worth, a sixpence is literally a coin. None of our answers are really the same meaning as what a coin would be. But something has been given to them. They have a chance to do something with it. What will that correspond with on our answers? That's going to be C, opportunity right there. Excellent for those of you putting that in. C is absolutely it because that is what an opportunity is. You have a chance to do something. That's what's being described in our line. So vocab and context, still the same strategy right there as far as working through it and getting that best answer. Then we go to 41, our last one right here. And this is another good one to talk about because the strategy is a little bit unique as far as how we might get the answer. This is very, very similar to when they've asked about like main idea of a paragraph in earlier passages we've looked at. So the listing of places and occasions in line 72, 76 mainly serves to emphasize how blank. We saw this with main purpose of a passage. We saw how like lines 1 through 9 on the gift giving article. So there's two strategies. One, if we're centered around a particular idea, like think topic sentence or building to a conclusion. If you recognize that, that can very well get your answer. A great place to get it that way. Secondly, also consider how does it connect to the rest of the article. Both of those ideas, ultimately, they should complement each other right there. But both of those can be ways to think about it to get that best answer. So we go through these lines right here. Think we must. Let us think in offices and omnibuses while we are standing in the crowd watching coronations and Lord Mayor shows. Let us think in the gallery of the House of Commons and the law courts. Let us think at baptisms and marriages and funerals. Let us never cease from thinking. So with that, a lot of things are brought up. There's a listing of a bunch of different things, but beyond that list, is there any primary point, even like, is there any primary idea or word that's constantly brought up in that list? Any ideas there? Just like a word or idea that's repeated over and over. And absolutely, it's going to be think. Let us think. And so that is really the driving force right here. If we're just focusing on these lines, that's what it's about. Think, 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 think. And so we could go to our answers and see, well, which one of these is dealing with the idea of thought about thinking? We go to choice B with critical reflection. Critical reflection and thinking about something, those are synonymous with each other. And so just from that, we could pick that out as our answer. Even if we go and look at like some of the earlier questions with like our big picture, it all loops together, it all complements each other. Because with 32, the main answer was B, stress the urgency of an issue. How pervasive the need for something is also how urgent it would be. So we're kind of recycling to that idea, emphasizing the importance of something, even just from these lines itself, think, 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 critical reflection, that's going to pair up accordingly. So multiple ways to attack those types of questions. All right. So good stuff right there. We are going to talk about the compare contrast article next, but any questions? I know I saw some like just general questions pop up as well, but any like reading questions first? Yeah, so I'll start off. Yeah, so with the ones first for like, I'm just going to kind of go in order of just the ones that are about this article first, get to the other ones accordingly. I know there's a couple personal ones, so I'll quickly reply to those. So for 41, so why it can't be there. So I know I focused on the why this one is right for us, but so for the other one. So for A, how novel the challenge faced by women is, it doesn't necessarily focus on the challenge itself, right? The challenge itself is not brought up in these lines. And that is the key, is that it says focus on these lines, what is said in these lines right there. See how complex the ideas are. If they are complex, they could require thought right there, but it's not necessarily saying that the ideas are complex in these lines. It just says you must think about the ideas in those lines. That's why B would be better than C. And then with D, same thing. They don't mention the career possibilities within these lines. So yes, although we are trying to tie it to the rest of the article, we still want to make sure whatever answer we select is within the lines they point us to. So it is both. I know I mentioned tie it back to the rest of the article, but at the same time, it still has to come from the lines itself. So that's why those others wouldn't necessarily be the right choice. Right. Yeah, good clarification there. I also saw another question that's in a more like, or I guess a couple that were more general that I'll address. Someone brought up the idea of Fitbits and like those types of electronic devices. Those kind of fit into the gray area. Their policies are a little bit vague. Like something that is internet connected that you can get online with. They're for sure not going to let you have like a full Apple Watch, for instance, that you can message on and things like that. A Fitbit, kind of wearable technology like that, it'd be on the testing center themselves. Like I said, it's one of those gray areas. You're technically not supposed to have any electronics besides the approved calculator for the calculator section of the test. At the same time, they may not tell you to take it off either. So if you want to wear it, if you always wear it, go ahead. But they might tell you to take it off as well. Right. And then overall, like kind of general, especially if we've already talked about, I'll save those really big picture ones that we've already talked about for at the end if we have time. Okay. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead to the comparative article. This one we won't go like as far in depth with it, but I would like to just focus on the compare contrast side and view some of the compare contrast questions, accordingly. And then after that, we'll get into some writing, we'll get into some math, and then we'll address like specific questions to those sections at that time, just to cycle everything back together. So the next article for us, and it's not always the last one, it just happens to be on this test. This as well can occur on any of the nonfictions. In this case, it's one of the modern nonfictions. I've seen it as well come up for the historical one. So could occur in either situation. It will be fairly obvious once you get into it of when you're on the comparative one, the compare contrast article, because you will see right at the beginning, we've got passage 1 and passage 2. So they will make it fairly obvious. They're not trying to trick you as far as when you're dealing with the comparative piece. The big thing about the comparative article is that they will share the same topic. So no matter what, we're going to see the same topic from both pieces, and then they will each have a unique perspective. So same topic and unique perspectives is what we're looking at. Now, the reason I say unique perspectives is that they're not necessarily arguing against each other. They can be. There can be articles where it's just complete opposites. They're trying to say why the other is wrong. There have been ones where one article was actually written in direct response to the first. That's how strongly that they were going against each other. So that can definitely be the case. There can be other times where they are in agreement with each other, but they're each giving different reasons about why something is the way you should do it. Other times they may be close to the middle. They're both fairly centrist on the idea, but they differ slightly on things. So all sorts of possibilities for that. But our number one goal is for any big picture question, and we'll see that as we go through some. You kind of even see one of them on 47. What's the central claim of just one passage? Other times, how do they relate to each other? What do they share in common? All different ways they can ask it. For now, though, what we're going to do, give all of you some work time right here. And I'd just like you to read the articles. So we'll take about 4 minutes to read, which is, kind of our general pacing. Whether you decide to go full read or you decide to go more of that skim of looking for thesis and topic sentences, either way, we'll take some time, come back in about 4 minutes, discuss what was the topic that they shared, what was each person's perspective on that topic. We'll look at the compare contrast specific questions, and then we'll go ahead to some of the other sections. But let's go ahead and start with that reading right now. All right, so about 4 minutes right there. And so, like I said, the main goal right here is just to kind of understand, well, what is the topic they share, and then what is each unique perspectives. While we were working, I saw in the chat someone brought up, a question of like, how will these be presented? So we can only go off based on what the College Board has done historically. Keep in mind, they can always make slight adjustments to the test. They're always finding like new ways to ask questions. However, with that being said, historically, they've always done it where the comparative one is only in the nonfiction, and it's always been presented where there is a common topic and unique perspective. So that model has held true for the past 7 years since they redid the test in 2015. So as of now, we'll expect that will continue to be the case, unless there's a direct change to or direct announcement. We'll expect that this style, always nonfiction, always common topic, will be the case. But so our priority for this was to talk about just the compare contrast side. So what is the topic? What are the unique perspectives? So what did we see right here? What was the common topic for these two articles? And what was each author focusing on for their perspective? Excellent. So the idea is space mining, right? And so looking for materials in space. That is definitely our common topic right there. Now, from there, and we even see that in the title, right? Space mining, the next gold rush, they are both talking about that idea. Now, what is each author's perspective on that? Like, are they for it, against it, in the middle? What do we see as their opinion on that topic of space mining? Yes. So, passage one, they are completely in favor of it, right? They are highly in favor. They don't really even address any negatives. It's just all about why it's so great. Um, the second one, right? And that's where it is important to clarify it right there. It's not an assumption that because the first one was all in, that the second one is against it, right? Second one, they just have some doubts about it. It's much more of a cautious perspective. They could be convinced that this is the right thing to do if things were worked out the appropriate way. They even get into the end, which is one of the questions we won't be getting to. They even talk about how the kind of solution for it is if there is regulations, if there's a plan going into it, it's a great idea. But if it's done recklessly, then they would be against it. So having that cautious nature, these articles are not against each other. There are definitely some things that they share in common, but one's highly in favor. A second one is just a little bit more cautious as a result. And so with these, we're just going to skip around because we've done a lot of these questions together, realistically, even a little bit more than the writing and math in this official test. So we'll skip ahead a little bit and just focus on a couple select questions for this article. One of those being 47. Reason why I'm doing 47 is this is a compare contrast. The central claim of passage 2. This goes back to the idea of that they do have that cautious nature for things. So looking at our choices there on 47, has positive potential, but what's going to be the best answer for this one? And so, we go through our choices right here. And so we see, well, does it line up with just that cautious nature where it could be a good idea? It just has to be done right. The first one, A, it will end up encouraging humanity's reckless treatment of the environment. If that's the case, then this would be that we should not do it. If no matter what the end result is that it was guaranteed to end badly, that takes it too far, because even in the article, passage 2 mentions that it could be a good idea to do, as long as, especially in their concluding paragraph, once they get the regulations, once there's a plan that we should go out and do it. So A takes it too far. That's saying it should not be done under any circumstances. B, the next one, its effects should be thoughtfully considered before it becomes a reality. That lines up with what we're saying right there, that as long as there's a plan in place, let's go ahead and do it. So then that so far looks pretty good. C, such potential may not include replenishing key resources that are disappearing on Earth, although they do get into different elements that we might see in off-world economies and things like that. Their problem is not necessarily with what will be mined. Their problem or cautiousness is about the process for mining. So that's not the primary focus of it. C would be out as well. And then with D, that one's kind of similar. Once again, their problems are not with what the results of the mining are, and that would include commercial viability, if it's going to make money or not. It's just more the recklessness that might come from it. But even with A, they're not guaranteeing recklessness. It's just right in that middle. Let's just be cautious, thoughtfully consider it before it becomes a reality right there. That is the trickiest part of when we have these comparative ones, just being able to clearly define each author's perspective and opinion right there. Now, a similar type of question that will come up with these comparative articles is that when it's looking at both of them. So 49 is going to be a very, very common type of question when we're looking at two article versions right here. 49, which statement best describes the relationship between the passage? This is another one where as we look at things, we really need to understand what is their relationship first. And then from there, we can match to our answers accordingly, just like we do for big picture normally. But in this case, it's for that specific element as far as compare contrast is concerned. So on 49, what are our ideas right here? Which statement is best for describing that passage one is fully in favor, whereas passage two has more of a cautious approach to things? So yeah, so seeing some answers come in right here, as we started to see what's happening with A. So passage two refutes the central claim advanced in passage one. This would be something where they are in complete opposites of each other. They are going against each other entirely. Not the case since passage two is more in the middle, right? It's not refuting the central claim. With B, passage two illustrates the phenomenon described in more general terms than passage one. That's going to be a flip-flop thing because if anything, passage one is more general by just focusing on the positives. Passage two gets more into the nitty-gritty, the details right there. So it won't be B either. Then we get to C and D. These are the ones where there is a little bit of conflict, but it's not full conflict. So C, passage two argues against the practicality of the proposals put forth in passage one. That's not their argument. They're not saying, can it be done? They're asking, should it be done? And if it's done, how will it be done? Practicality is just basically, can it be done? Can they do it practically? So that won't be it. But D, passage two expresses reservations about developments discussed in passage one. That is exactly it. They don't go all the way and say it shouldn't be done. They, in fact, at the end clarify that yes, it probably should go ahead with it, but just let's be cautious. Let's have a plan first before we go in. So that's the only difference that we'll see as far as compare contrast articles go, is that they play off one another. Otherwise, all of the questions are going to be exactly like what we've been doing as far as looking at details, looking at evidence-based pairs like you see 50-51, the following one, looking at vocab. That's the only difference, is just from a big picture standpoint, compare, contrast, how do the two articles relate to each other. But everything else, very, very consistent. Okay, so good stuff right there. As we look through the reading side, reading is one of those things that is a little bit unique compared to the other two sections, just because with English, so much of it is dependent on the pre-existing grammar rules and writing conventions where we have to have those memorized in order to have a lot of success. Math, a lot of it gets down to the actual content itself, as far as looking at where the algebra and geometry principles. Reading, there obviously is some pre-existing knowledge that helps. The bigger your vocabulary is, the more you read academic materials, all of those things will help you on the test. But ultimately, number one thing of reading, they will give you all the answers. It's just a matter of pulling them out of the article. And as with everything, the more you practice it, the easier that becomes to pull that information out. We will be going ahead to the other sections next. Just while we're on this topic, any other just reading specific questions that haven't been addressed just yet? Yeah, and so good strategic question right there. So as far as the order you do the passages in, it does not matter what order you do the questions in. In the 65 minutes you get, you're able to go in and out of the articles however you'd like. I would recommend just to stick with one article, complete one article, and then move on to the others accordingly. It's not going to be time efficient to try to do 5 questions on one article, 5 questions on another, and keep moving in and out. But the article order you do them in does not matter. One thing that actually is helpful is that if you recognize you have certain strengths and weaknesses, whichever article type you're better at, so whether that's modern nonfiction, literature, historical, start with that article type, save the one that you're weakest on for last. That can help you with a little bit of time management, and just overall, the more we can stay strict with our time management, 13 minutes per, evenly distribute our time. If we're not able to get an answer in that 13 minutes, it's best to guess and move on to make sure that you allow yourself time to view every single question on the test. And then, and I know this one's kind of a little bit more general, but so the test I gave that we've been working on right here, this is part of one of the College Board's official practice tests. So all of their practice tests and the answer keys and everything that they provide That is all online. I gave the link yesterday, but if you just Google College Board SAT practice test, it'll be the first link right there. Right. And I know, sir, there's some other ones like writing questions, math questions. We'll get to those once we get to those sections. Anything else, though, for reading while we're here? All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to switch up my board. So just get it to a one-page view, because for the writing section, we're not necessarily having to scroll back and forth between things. And same thing once we do a couple math problems at the end as well. So scrolling down to the writing section, and for this one, you still will be following along with your own link. So the same link I put in the middle today. Utilize that when we get some work time to work through this whole thing. It goes over about 4 pages, so you'll want to scroll along yourself. So writing and language test, 35 minutes, 44 questions. This is actually exact in the structure and timing on PSAT and SAT. It is the one section of the test that is identical on both. For the others, PSAT is just slightly shorter. And so how this is going to be broken up is that it's always going to be 4 passages. They divide the 44 questions evenly, 11 on each. And they have some sort of a theme. So there is some sort of like type of essay that the author is writing. So they all kind of blend together. So what we'll see with that is just some strategy notes before I give all of you some time to work. So one strategy is that if there's no questions about something, you don't have to read it. Some people like to read the gaps. It helps them gain clarity, gain flow with what the article is talking about. But there realistically is no requirement to do so. In general, I don't recommend just reading these articles for the sake of reading. So like in this case, there's 10 lines of text right here. There's no questions on the right-hand side. I wouldn't even worry about those at all. I would just skip ahead, scroll down, and now see, okay, now on the second page, this is where the questions start. The structure is going to be the same always, where we'll see the questions on the right-hand side. They have the big blocks indicating of where to generally look. It's not always exactly where the question is going to be located. So like, for instance, question 5, this is talking about the paragraph as a whole. As a result, they just put block 5 at the end of the paragraph, but it's detailing the entire paragraph above it. Some other notes for the writing, a lot of the time they will have the 4 choices in which 3 are changes and the first is no change. So just whatever is in the underlined portion originally, you can basically insert that as answer choice A. Some people ask about the no change. Should I be picking more no change, less no change? There's really no magic to that. It's just an equal chance of being no change as it is any of the other choices. Every test will have slightly different no change versus no change versus a change. Don't get consumed by that. The best way is just think whatever's underlined, that is my option choice A. Don't worry about the no change phrasing right there. Other things to note. So like on question 5, it says certain sentence numbers. So sentence number 5, those are going to be indicated by brackets. So anytime we have a bracket number, closed bracket, that's going to be indicating a sentence number. It's not in this article right here, but it can also come up where they refer to paragraph numbers. In that case, it would be a dash number and then a dash that's located above the paragraph. That can indicate paragraph number. And these are going to be questions where we're looking at clarity, maintaining consistent ideas, more of the stylistic types of questions. So ultimately, as we work through these, this will be a fairly typical article right here, where we'll have about a third of our questions that are going to be purely grammar related, about a third of our questions that are going to be more vocab or word choice related, and then about a third of our questions that are more of like the stylistic ones, where they're talking about organization, clarity of ideas, things like that. We'll also serve this as a chance to just work through the article, kind of see how that pace looks like if you haven't done any timing as of yet. So definitely utilize. I'll put the link again in the chat right now. Um, so same link that we've been utilizing, same link as what we had for the reading above. But if you're just arriving or need it, I'll put that in the chat for everyone. And so use your own link right here because this does cover multiple pages. We'll come back in 9 minutes and review things. So use your own link, and then we'll do 9 minutes to work. 9 minutes to work right here. We'll come back and we'll go over the 11, and we'll also mention some strategies for the stylistic ones since we have that specific type of question in front of us, just to dive a little bit deeper than some of the things myself and Hasith mentioned in a couple of classes ago. So let's go ahead and get started with that. We'll come back in just a little and walk through those answers. And this is just to clarify, we'll be reviewing questions 1 through 11. So the first passage is what we're looking at right here, but give everyone some time to work on those. All right, so we got 9 minutes right there of working through the material. Like I said, for this is just our general pacing. The ideal scenario is that for each passage, budget that 9 minutes for yourself. That'll keep you on pace. As we'll see with all sections of the test, the most important thing is see every question. Until you actually see stuff, it's impossible to tell which ones are going to be easier or harder for you. So just try to view it all at first, absorb as much of it as you can. And give yourself a fair shot at everything. So because that's why we have that 9-minute pace. If this was your first time doing timing, don't be alarmed. If you didn't finish in time, it's all good. This is where just that practice comes into play, understanding the material, the strategies, and then ultimately working in the time will get you ready for test day. All right, so let's go ahead and review things though. Since you have your answers, feel free to put them in the chat as well. But this is more going to be to allow you to grade your own as we go along and discuss them. So the first one, this is an example of vocab and context. With the writing, it's a little bit different, but for the most part, all of our strategies are going to be the same as reading. So we look at our sentence, given these solutions as well as the many health benefits of the food, the advantages of Greek yogurt blank the potential drawbacks of its production. All right, so our context shows that the advantages are going to be better than the drawbacks. And in this case, we look at all of our answers. All of them kind of mean that thing, that one thing is better than the other, but there must be some subtle difference. In this case, the subtle difference is that the first 3 are all going to be dealing with competition. So direct competition, like 2 teams, 2 individuals competing against another. Whereas our last one, D, outweigh, which will be the right answer, is going to be used comparatively. Comparatively, one thing is better than the other. Like if you've heard the phrase weighing the pros and cons of a situation, that's exactly what's happening right here. Our second one, and this is one I would like to bring special attention to. When we're talking about relevancy, this is something that's more within the writing style category as opposed to just the grammar. So with relevancy, that is the key word. Relevant means we're on topic, we're consistent with the surroundings. So many times, instead of just focusing on this one sentence and what sounds the best, we should actually look around it. Many times right before it or directly after is where we need to be. So we actually start with the previous sentence. To address the problem of disposal, farmers have found a number of uses for acid whey. Here we bring in logical expectations. As a reader, what are you expecting to come next? That is a number of uses for acid whey. The following sentences, 5 does not talk about the uses. 6 just says there's going to be general additional solutions, but doesn't mention anything specifically. As a result, that means in our sentence, the upcoming one, we must detail 2 uses for acid whey. And so let's see what happens. With choice A, it starts off livestock feeds a protein supplement. No matter what, that's going to be the first use for all 4 of our choices. Then the second part talks about making Greek yogurt at home. not a use of acid away. It's about something else. So that one doesn't work. B, we have the first one, livestock feeds a protein supplement. We also have the second one, convert it into gas to use as fuel in electricity production. This is meeting the requirements. This so far would be our answer. The third one diverges, starts talking about sweet whey. And so that's not a second use of acid whey. C is out. D is a tricky one because it makes logical sense. Added to livestock feeds a protein supplement, which provides an important element of their diet. It sounds good, it looks good, but it doesn't meet the requirement because we only have one use in the description of that use. As a result, that confirms that B must be our right answer. Writing style questions always consider the prompt, always have that game plan in place to best figure out the logical requirements of it, because otherwise they will have more than one that sounds good, and we want to sort through that. Our third one, so this one is getting back to just regular grammar, also very common for them to test more than one thing in one question. So right here we have two things being tested. One of them is the verb tense. So whether that's can, could have, or has, all different verb tenses. And additionally, we have whether it's plural waterways non-possessive or a singular waterway possessing something. We're taking both of those things together to get the right answer. So our full sentence reads, if it is improperly introduced into the environment, and if is a big key for us. So that's kind of detailing of, okay, one thing is happening, then another is as well. Additionally, right after that, it says if it is, which would be present tense, acid whey runoff can, because that would also be our present tense. That lines up, not going to be C or D. Can pollute waterways. The waterways are not possessing anything. It's also talking about plural waterways right there. Put that all together. A is going to be our right answer, keeping it as it is. Right after that, more grammar, this one detailing with our punctuation. We have the option of either a semicolon, a colon, a single comma, or a double comma. In this context, the best one is going to be the single comma because we have a listing of items, yogurt manufacturers, food scientists, and government officials, 3 items in the list. They each get the single comma of separation, choice C, even with that comma before the final statement, the final and. After that is 5. So this is another one where it's talking about the logical flow of things, a writing style question, a very common way for them to ask it as well. With this, it's a very similar strategy to 2, of where you set expectations first, and then from there, you're able to place it appropriately. The difference is that our surroundings can change. So we're not worried about the current surroundings. We're focusing on the current sentence. What is this talking about? What is the topic? And then find where that will be relevant, where that will be placed. So the full sentence, if it is improperly introduced into the environment, acid whey runoff can pollute waterways, depleting the oxygen content of streams and rivers as it decomposes. This is basically a problem statement for us. This is bad stuff. So this makes sense to be discussed where they were further discussing the problems. That was in sentences 1 and 2. We're going to need to move it up because 3 sets off a new topic that gets into addressing the problem. So everything from 3 and later, 3, 4, and 6 are all about the solution. It has to get moved up to where the problem was. That narrows it down to either B or C. After 3 doesn't work, where it is now doesn't work because that's in the middle of solutions. Then between those 2 options, always consider what we currently have in place. 2 is giving a further explanation of 1. 1 says the main environmental problem caused by production of Greek yogurt is the creation of acid whey. Because it requires up to 4 times more milk to make than conventional yogurt does, Greek yogurt produces larger amounts of waste, which is difficult to dispose of. So this is basically 1 and 2 combined are going to be the introduction to the problem. This is going to give us the consequences to the problem, which we can put right after 2. Put it right here. C is going to be our best answer. Everything after that, 3, 4, and 6, those provide the solutions to the problem right there. Didn't see any questions pop up as we were going through it. So I'll go ahead, keep working to the next pages. If there is anything, we can go back to it if needed, but I didn't see anything in the chat so far. So going ahead to our next page then. So we got 4 more here and then 2 on the final one. So 6 is another one that's very common for a stylistic one. Realistically, questions 2, 5, and 6 are 3 of the most common stylistic ones we're going to see. So anytime we have a yes, no type of question, and this could be keep, add, delete, modify, whatever the case may be, but 2 on one side of the argument, 2 on the other. The trap on here is to worry about the yes, no. The problem is that yes or no is an opinion, and there is no opinion on the exam. So as a result, ignore the yes, no. That will work itself out. Instead, we're going to focus on the reason behind it. Only one reason will be 100% logical. That's going to be our answer. The other 3 will have a logical flaw in them. Like I said, the trap is that you think it's yes, and you completely ignore the no's. That's great if your opinion is listed, but if your reasoning, your opinion isn't listed, it can be a trap. So focus on the reason behind it. The yes, no will work itself out. So we go through these. In all of these, the previous paragraph was the one we just did about the problems of acid weigh and the proposed solutions. So the sentence in question is, though these conservation methods can be costly and time consuming, they are well worth the effort. With A, it says it does not provide a transition from the previous paragraph. So that is not true because we do have a transition. The previous previous paragraph was about the conservation methods, the solutions to the problem. This one is why they are well worth the effort. These are the nutritional benefits to follow. So that doesn't work. You might say it's not a good transition, but it is a transition. B, it fails to support the main argument of the passages introduced in the first paragraph. Well, we've just been talking about Greek yogurt. This entire thing is about Greek yogurt, so we are on topic. Technically, what this is asking about is the very, very first paragraph that we scrolled over. All that said was that Greek yogurt is a popular food. So if it's well worth the effort, that's in line with that idea, but really didn't need that exact sentence to prove it. We already knew it was all about Greek yogurt. C, it continues the explanation of how acid weigh can be disposed of safely. Not the case. We've moved on to a new topic. Now it's nutritional benefits. Fourth one, it sets up the argument in the paragraph for the benefits of Greek yogurt. That is correct. This is basically the opposite of A. If A is saying it's not a transition, D is saying it is a transition. So whether you like the transition or not, whether you would have written it differently or not, out of the 4 logical choices they're provided, the only one that has a completely rounded, completely true logical argument is D, and that becomes our right answer. Right after that, we've got question 7. So nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be a healthy food. It is an excellent source of calcium and protein, serves blank, a digestive aid, and then it goes further from there. This is going to be where we're just looking at similar words right here and picking out which one's going to be the most appropriate. Both A and B are indicating a purpose for it. So serves to be a digestive aid, serves as a digestive aid. Those are very similar. C, serves like a digestive aid, is saying that it's similar to a digestive aid, but isn't. In this case, the context is that it is the digestive aid, like how we have right before it is something, so like won't work. For serves for would be like if you're working for someone and saying something else is the digestive aid, this is just merely the assistant. So that gets us down to either A or B. Serves as is going to be more efficient. Although they are communicating the same thing, serves to be is going to be a little bit overly wordy, especially with those back-to-back verbs. It's much more efficient, much more easily communicated by saying serves as a digestive aid. 8 gets into more with the verb tense, but then there's also a part 2 to it. So the first part of the verb tense is that we have to be consistent. We have serves is present tense. It is, that was also present tense. Therefore, this verb must also be present tense. That would get rid of containing and will contain, leaving us with just A or C. Then between those two choices, this is where stylistic tiebreakers can come into place. We always want to be efficient. We always want to avoid repetition unless instructed. We already have it brought up. This is not a parallel structure where everything began with it. As a result, no need to repeat it, and C becomes the best answer right there. It is possible if every single item in the list began with it, you might maintain a parallel structure, but that's not the case right here. Then 9, this is another example of vocab. This is something that is unique to the writing that you don't see on reading when you have a transition word. What you have to do is understand, well, what was the previous sentence? What is the upcoming sentence? Identify the relationship between the two sentences. And then once we've identified that, then you pick the word that's going to be the best version of things. So the first one, Greek yogurt is slightly lower in sugar and carbs than conventional yogurt is. That's listing a nutritional benefit of the food. The second sentence, because it is more concentrated, Greek yogurt contains slightly more protein per serving, thereby helping people stay, and then it continues from there. The key right here is that these are both nutritional benefits of the food right there, and then they're not affecting one another. So they are independent accordingly. They're independent benefits of each other. So there's not a situation like how B is saying in other words means they are the same benefit, but just saying it differently, two separate benefits. Therefore would mean one causes the other. That's not the case. You can have high protein with either high or low sugar, so not correlating to each other. For instance, means an example of the first. Being high protein is not necessarily an example of low sugar, just two different things. Therefore, A, also just keeping it as it is, will be our best one. We're basically just listing out different benefits. So also will be the most appropriate one right there. And good clarification. So yeah, going back to 8, saw a question right there. So although you could isolate it and say comma and it contains as its own independent clause, we are in the middle of a list of 3 items. So our structure for the entire sentence, nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be a healthy food. That's our independent clause. And then colon, more information. In this case, what followed the colon was a list of 3 things. Where we're cut out is I was in the middle of answering the question for number 8. So the question was, well, if we say comma and it contains, that could be 2 independent clauses. That is true. In isolation, that could have been true for 8. However, our structure was that we have the first independent clause, nutritionists consider Greek yogurt to be a healthy food. We could have ended with a period. Instead, this was the rule of colon, more information. In this case, it was a colon with a list to follow. And so because it was a listing of 3 items, it is an excellent source of calcium and protein, serves as a digestive aid, and contains few calories in its unsweetened, low non-fat forms. That's why it won't be and it contains right there, because we have the colon to start things off. So in isolation, it could be either, with the colon helping us out. That clarifies that it must be C as our choice right there. And then so also just kind of re-clarifying number 9 for this one. So whenever we have a transition word, you must clearly define what the relationship between the 2 sentences is first. Many times it can be misleading. Many times if you just go based on how things sound, more than one can be okay. It may sound okay in your head, but there will only be one that illustrates the relationship correctly between the sentences. So the first one, Greek yogurt is slightly lower in sugar and carbohydrates than conventional yogurt is. That is just going to be a benefit of the Greek yogurt. And then our second one, right after, because it is more concentrated, Greek yogurt contains slightly more protein per serving, and then it continues on from there. And so this is going to be a separate benefit. So separate benefit for us right there. And so because these are two independent benefits. One is not affecting the other, also is going to be the best one. You might say additionally or in addition to just continue that list accordingly. But the other ones, in other words, means they are the exact same thing, but just said differently. That's not the case. Therefore means cause and effect, which in this case is saying the only way you have more protein is if you have low sugar. Not necessarily the case. They're different things. For instance, is saying the second one's an example of the first, which is also not the case because they're just related as benefits, but one benefit does not affect the other. That's why A has to be R1. Right. So I got those clarifications to those two right there. Right. Then going ahead to the last two, and then we'll take a little bit of a look at math, answer just kind of our general questions that we have remaining. So with question 10, and this one is kind of annoying with how they structure it right here, how it stretches across the 2 pages. I'll zoom out a little bit just to kind of show things how these are both connected right here. So this is all one sentence. It's still vocab right here. And then I'll zoom back in once we detail our answers. So the sentence reads, also, because it is more concentrated, Greek yogurt contains slightly more protein per serving, thereby helping people stay blank for longer periods of time. So with this one, this is a great example of realistically, none of the 4 words are the best thing you could say. Overall, this article has been fairly conversational, fairly easy to read, not a ton of high-level academic vocabulary. If I was writing it myself, I might just say full, help people stay full because we're dealing with food, or even just say satisfied. But I think full would be a great word right there. Now, either way, getting your own word, that can help you look to the answers. Because now, as we zoom things back in to where we're at, so full is our context right here. That would be a great word for what we're dealing with. Then go through the options and say, well, which one means the same thing? If you look at the first choice, satiated, that by definition does mean to be full or satisfied in terms of food or drink. By definition, that does fit the scenario. Now, the other ones, if you're not familiar with the word satiated, all good. As long as you know 3 of the 4 words, that's just as good as knowing all 4 of them. Perfectly fine. So you go through the others. Fulfilled is a sense of like fulfillment in terms of satisfaction, in terms of a sense of accomplishment. So although it's very similar, a better use of that word would be when you do well on the test after all of your studies have paid off, you will feel fulfilled that hard work paid off. So although it's similar, it's not quite the same meaning. Complacent is dealing with being lazy. So that's not it. Sufficient is just saying something's good enough, but this is better than good enough. So even if you didn't know A, as long as you knew the other 3 and were careful of them, you could eliminate those other choices. And then you would just have A is the only remaining choice. Ideally, you know all of them. If not, play process of elimination with the ones you do know. If one of those had been correct, then that's all good. Don't even worry about the one you didn't know. And then our last one right here is 11. So one thing about this, and we will see this a lot on the writing test, is that many times they'll flip-flop the order of the clauses to make it harder to conceptualize. We're used to putting the because clause second. It's more common to put the because clause second. If you see it at the beginning like that, or if you see a sentence begin with but or something like that, feel free to flip-flop the order in your head to make it easier to read. Ultimately, the meaning is the same either way, but that can be a strategy to work around it. Now, ultimately, what this boils down to is the types of clauses we have. The first one, because consumers reap the nutritional benefits of Greek yogurt and support those who make and sell it, that is actually going to be a dependent clause. Even though we have a subject and verb, that because is creating a link to another idea. As a result, this is dependent. Since it is dependent on the first one, we cannot go with a semicolon or a colon. Neither of those would work. And actually, sorry, I wrote over that. That is a comma. If there was a semicolon, it wouldn't work. but we cannot go colon because that is independent colon more information. Now, a comma does work. However, a comma conjunction, so comma so, one of our fanboys, that would not work in this case. That would be where both are independent. Now, the second one is independent. Farmers and businesses should continue finding safe and effective methods of producing the food. So dependent, comma, independent, that works. The difference between A and B, do we need the word therefore? We do not need the word therefore because it means the same thing as because. Both of them are indicating cause and effect. As a result, it would be repetitive to say both of them, and then B becomes our best choice accordingly right there. All right, so you've got a good practice passage in right there, basically like an extended quiz, and also got us to be able to apply the timing side of things. So to reiterate with our timing, for reading, try to make it so you go 13 minutes or less for each passage, divide your time evenly. Writing, 9 minutes or less, try to divide your time evenly as much as possible on that one as well. Math, I know we didn't end up having time to work through more practice problems. Ultimately, they were going to be very, very similar to the ones that you had done in the beginning classes anyway, but just a slight variance if we had the time to do so. With math, the most important thing with timing on math is that all of them are independent problems. So all 20 no calculator, all 38 with calculator. You can do them in any order. You're not worried about being in a certain passage or anything like that. So as a result, just simply skip the hard ones the first time through. Make sure you at least view every problem on the math section. As you go through them, you'll be able to tell, do I have the skills to do it? Do I recognize what I need to do? Solve all those problems first, the ones that are more difficult, then you can come back to those in the second go around right there. But don't worry about like doing them, in any particular order or any like pace per question. It's not necessarily the case. There are some questions that will take longer no matter what. Some questions that might be 3-4 minutes long, other ones that are realistically 10-15 seconds long. So because of that, if you know how to do a question, get it done, get it accurate. Don't worry about the time. Where people get in trouble with time on the math section is just when you stare at a problem and you're not doing things that are productive. As long as you're doing productive things, don't worry about the time. That'll take care of itself with practice. Now, one thing I would like to do, just to kind of view the math section, is just to go kind of how it looks. Like I said, we're not going to work through any like problems now, but we'll go ahead to the math section just for what it looks like. So both sections begin the exact same way. It's either math test, no calculator, or math test with calculator. And then they give the directions. The first 3 quarters will be multiple choice. The last quarter of the problems will be free response. And we'll talk about what that free response section looks like as well. They give some general notes, general instructions, nothing too crazy right there, but always remember you get the reference page. So when dealing with geometry, if it's not sine, cosine, tangent, chances are there's going to be something on the reference page to help you out. Especially when you're early in your process, it can be easy to forget about the reference page. It's there. So if there's geometry, automatically think reference page when you get to it right there. So for the no calculator, first 15 multiple choice, second 5 or the next 5 are free response. With calculator is going to be the exact same way, just a slightly longer test. For the first 30, it's multiple choice. For the last 8, it's going to be that free response grid-in style that we're looking at. And so that is something that I'd like to have us take a look at, is that for the grid-in section, what are the special instructions? What are some strategies that we can have? So as far as grid-in, it's still going to be Scantron based. So they're not grading you on your entire body of work. They're still just grading you on your final answer, just like we have on multiple choice. So the Scantron tells you what the right answer is going to be. They're also only going to be looking at the grid-in result. So it is a Scantron. It is just grading the bubbles. So just the grid-in result is what you're looking at. Point number 1 in the direction says, although not required, it is suggested that you write your answer in the boxes at the top, but the only reason that they suggest that is to help you fill in the circles accurately. You will receive credit only if the circles are filled incorrectly. So the bubbles are where it's at right there. For, just like any, any multiple choice, you only put in one per column, just like there's only one answer per question. No question has a negative answer. So that's highly, highly important. There is no negative bubble on your grid and results. So there is no room for a negative answer. The advantage to that is that if you get a negative answer going through your work, that gives you a second chance. It means, okay, I did something in error somewhere along the way. Let me double check my work, because otherwise you don't have the luxury of multiple choice where if you don't match one of the 4, then you have to redo it. Here, the only saving part right there is if it's a negative, then it's wrong. So you have to reattempt it. Chances are it was probably just a sign error somewhere in your work. You added instead of subtracted or something like that. But that is a clue. Otherwise, you don't really have much of a safety net if there was an error and you got a positive response. Another thing that is important is that if there is more than one correct answer. So for instance, like if you're doing quadratic and you got 2 answers, they were both positive, one was 3, one was 5. Either one will be accepted. So you're not putting in both. Anything that meets the requirements of the question will be counted as correct. So that does give you a little bit of flexibility. They're not trying to punish you as far as that's going to be concerned. Another note is how they want you to bubble in your answers. So they will not accept mixed numbers. So mixed numbers will not be accepted. They read, 3 1/2. It's read as 31 halves, not 3 1/2. So they do not accept mixed numbers, but otherwise it's either a simplified fraction or it's a decimal version. Either one of those will be acceptable for you. So like they give the example of 2/3, 2/3 works, 0.666 works because it's 6 repeating, or 0.667. Additionally, the left-right placement, either position is correct. They're really not trying to trick you in terms of how you're writing in your actual answer. They are trying to be as flexible as possible while still keeping it objective, so there still only is one right answer. Or even when it's the more than one, they're still accepting either one right there. So they're not trying to trick you as far as like how you bubble it in, but having that awareness for how you need to bubble in before test day, even though the instructions are going to be read to you. Still having that awareness beforehand is definitely helpful to know. And I saw the question for if these are on the PSAT as well. Yes, so there are the grid in responses on the PSAT as well. It is condensed, so there's less grid in responses on the PSAT, but they are there as well. All right. So I wanted to make sure we went over that. Just kind of showcased what the math test looks like. Be aware of the reference page, be aware of the grid in ones. Another just strategic note is many times there are a couple free response questions that are a lot easier than some of the ending multiple choice. Typically, the test will get harder as you work through the multiple choices, and then it will reset in difficulty once you get to the grid in. So some will be easy, some will be hard. For instance, just to showcase what that might look like. If we look at the previous page right here, questions 13, 14, 15, the end of the no calculator multiple choice, these are all pretty hard questions. Just even at a surface level, they look pretty difficult. And they are time-consuming problems. But you go ahead to question 16, the very first one of the free response, and just having some basic algebra just to solve for t right there. 16 is going to be much easier than 13, 14, 15 were. So because of that, this further speaks to the idea, don't get stuck on one problem. Make sure you complete all of them. Make sure at least you view all the problems and answer the easy ones first. All right, so we're pretty close to wrapping things up. I know we had that interruption in the middle of class. So if we go a little bit longer today, that's okay. Just wanted to wrap up with, any questions we have. We'll go over those accordingly. Also, I know there were, some people asked as we were going along anyway, but yes, and I see right in the chat, you read my mind. Contact info. So I'm going to put my email in the chat for everyone. So I do, not just the group classes, but tutoring is a lot of the things I do, especially for the standardized tests, SAT, ACT, especially that tends to be my tutoring specialty. So if you want to reach out to me, in the future, I'm putting my email in there for everyone. cbonk11@gmail.com. I'll also put it on the board as well, just in case it gets lost in the chat for you. So that way, if you want to reach out to me, that's the best way to contact me. If you are testing in August, I probably won't be able to meet with you before that exam, just because my schedule is pretty booked at that point. But for future exams, like in the October one, etc., definitely feel free to reach out. If you want more info or any details on that, as far as meeting with me individually. Yeah, so then that's that right there. Otherwise, questions, concerns as we wrap things up, even if it's just kind of general overall questions, last minute strategy, things like that. And so I know some of these have been repeated a couple times. There is no advantage to ACT versus SAT. It's an either or situation. Generally, when you're submitting your scores, you'll always submit the better of the two. So even if you take both, just worry about submitting the better of your two scores with ACT versus SAT. There's no preference given to one or the other by schools. I do recommend that you tend to focus on one, because although the content is very similar on both, there is slightly different strategies on both tests. And not just the content, but as we've seen with the test, a lot of it, especially for elite scores, is understanding the strategy behind it. So once you figure out which one you're better at, I would try to specialize in that, focus on getting a really good score on one or the other, as opposed to trying to master both, just because it's not necessary and it's an undue stress. Yeah, for the recordings, all of those will be on the YouTube channel, which has been shared in the WhatsApp messages right there. So those will be on the YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch things. Otherwise, any other questions as we start to wrap things up today? All right. Well, if that's it, best of luck to all of you, as you continue your prep and keep on moving forward with things, both for the test and rest of high school and college admissions. And I wish all of you the best.